I was climbing one of those long, grinding inclines in the Smokies, the kind where the road cuts straight up the ridge and the engine has to work hard just to breathe. It was late fall, leaves mostly down, the air sharp with the smell of wet bark and diesel. My rig was loaded light, empty trailer heading back toward Knoxville after dropping lumber in Bryson City, so I figured the grade wouldn't give me much trouble. But halfway up, right where the shoulder narrows to nothing and the drop-off starts, the transmission slipped. Not a smooth fade but a hard jerk like someone yanked the shifter into neutral. Gears ground once, loud and ugly, then everything went quiet except the wind moving through the trees and the low tick of cooling metal. I coasted to the edge of the pavement, tires crunching on loose stone, set the parking brake, and killed the headlights to save what battery I had left. The fog was already thick down in the hollows, but up here it hadn't settled yet, just thin wisps curling across the road like smoke from a distant fire. I stepped down, boots hitting gravel and the cold bit through my jacket quick. Flashlight in one hand, toolbox in the other, I walked around to the driver's side and dropped to my back on the cold ground. The beam swept under the chassis. Linkage rods, shift cables, the whole mess looked tangled, rods bent at angles they shouldn't bend. Something had forced them, jammed them sideways like a pry bar had been wedged in there deliberate. No rust, no wear, just fresh metal scars. I slid the toolbox closer, pulled out a wrench and a pair of pliers and started working. The flashlight propped against a rock, beam jittering every time a truck passed far below on the lower switchback. I was focused, breathing steady when the first knock came. It was hollow, deep, coming up through the roadbed itself, like someone rapping knuckles on the underside of a wooden floor, but slower, more deliberate. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. I froze, wrench halfway turned on a nut. The sound vibrated up through the frame into my back where it pressed against the gravel. I told myself it was loose rocks shifting under the weight of the truck, or maybe water running in a culvert somewhere close. But the knocks came again, same rhythm, same force, patient. I slid out a little, angled the flashlight down between the tires toward the dirt and roots exposed where the shoulder had eroded. Nothing moved. Just packed earth, pine needles, a few stones half buried. No hands, no boots, no face staring back. I exhaled, shook my head and went back to the linkage. But the knocks didn't stop. They sped up slightly, insistent now, like someone growing impatient. Each one rang clearer, echoing in the metal above me, traveling along the frame until I felt it in my teeth. I stopped wrenching. The knocks paused too, as if listening. Then they started again, slower this time, almost conversational. 1 long knock. 2 short. Pause. Repeat. Like Morse, but I never learned it well enough to know what it said. My pulse was loud in my ears now. I swept the beam again, slower, probing every shadow under the truck. Still nothing. But the ground felt wrong, colder, heavier, like it was pressing back against me. I scrambled out fast, gravel scraping my elbows, stood up breathing hard. The knocks followed, muffled now but still right beneath where I'd been lying. I backed toward the cab door, eyes on the spot under the chassis. They kept going, steady rhythm, vibrating the whole rig just enough that I could see the trailer rock faintly on its springs. I climbed in, slammed the door, locked it even though there was no one to lock out. Sat rigid in the seat, flashlight beam trembling across the dashboard. The knocks continued underneath, patient, unhurried, like whoever, or whatever, was down there had nowhere else to be. I tried the key. Nothing. Battery still good, but the starter wouldn't engage. I sat there listening, waiting for them to stop. They didn't. Hours passed like that. Me in the cab, them under the truck, the rhythm never breaking. Sometimes it slowed to single knocks, long and drawn out, like sighs. Other times it quickened, urgent, almost angry. I didn't dare crawl back under. Didn't dare step out again. Just sat with my back against the door, knife in my lap, watching the sky lighten slow through the windshield. Dawn came gray and thin. The first pale streak of light touched the ridge opposite, and the knocks faded, gradual, reluctant, until the last one lingered like an echo in an empty room. Silence settled, thick and complete. I waited another 10 minutes, then tried the key again. The engine caught smooth, transmission sliding into gear like it had never been jammed at all. I eased off the shoulder, tires biting pavement, and didn't look back until the incline leveled out miles later. I stopped at the first truck stop I came to, a Flying J just outside Sevierville. Mechanic took one look under the rig and went quiet. Somebody wedged a chunk of rebar in there, he said, holding up a short length of rusted metal, bent at the end. Not loose debris. Placed. Clean cuts on the linkage too, like bolt cutters. He asked if I'd stopped anywhere suspicious lately. I shook my head. He just grunted and went back to work. Later, at the diner counter, I overheard 2 old-timers talking low over coffee. One mentioned the knocks, the way you talk about weather, casual but careful. Said the old roads through these passes were built over forgotten graves, hasty burials from logging camps and wrecks and worse. Folks who went into the ground without markers, without names. They get restless when something heavy sits on top of them too long, the other said. Start tapping. Letting you know they're still down there. They glanced my way, saw me listening, and changed the subject. I still run those routes. Bills don't care about ghosts or echoes or whatever it was. But I don't work under the truck after dark anymore. Don't stop on those steep shoulders if I can help it. And when I lie in the sleeper berth on quiet nights, engine idling low, I sometimes catch myself listening, half expecting the rhythm to start again, faint at first, rising through the frame. It hasn't yet. But the dread stays with me, coiled tight in my chest. Because I know what I felt that night. Not anger, not hunger, just patience. A slow, endless patience, like something that's waited decades under the road and can wait decades more. Waiting for the next rig to stall in the same spot. Waiting for the next driver to crawl underneath and lie still long enough to hear. I keep driving. But every time the transmission slips even a little on one of those inclines, my hands tighten on the wheel. And I wonder how long it's been since the last time someone stopped exactly there. How long it's been waiting. How much longer it can wait. I'd been on the road since dawn, hauling a full load of oak logs from a mill up near Bryson City, headed down to a yard in Knoxville. The Smoky Mountains don't give you much room for error. Those passes twist sharp, with drop-offs that could swallow a rig whole if you misjudged a curve. It was late fall, leaves mostly gone, leaving the trees like skeletal fingers scratching at the sky. I'd pushed through sunset without stopping, figuring I'd beat the fog that always rolls in after dark. But by 11, it was creeping up from the hollows, turning the headlights into fuzzy halos that barely cut 10 feet ahead. The radio had been spotty all day, fading in and out with static that sounded almost like distant voices, so I'd turned it off hours ago. Just me, the low rumble of the diesel, and the occasional bump from the trailer as the load shifted on the inclines. Around midnight, I was deep in a narrow pass not far from Klingman's Dome, the highest point in the park, but down in the cuts it feels like the lowest, hemmed in by rock walls on one side and nothing but air on the other. The engine gave a little cough, nothing I hadn't heard before on these old Peterbilts. But then it stuttered again, harder, like it was choking on something. I eased off the gas, listened close. One more hitch and it went silent. Completely. No warning lights, no grind, just dead. I coasted as far as I could, pulling onto a gravel shoulder that was more suggestion than fact, barely wide enough to fit without the mirrors scraping the cliff. Set the brakes, killed the accessories to save battery. The quiet hit like a wall. No wind that night, no crickets even, just the faint tick of the engine cooling and my own breathing loud in the cab. I sat there a minute, staring at the dash like it might explain itself. These mountains play tricks on machinery sometimes. Elevation, moisture, who knows. Grabbed my flashlight, the big mag light I keep under the seat, and stepped down. Boots crunching gravel echoed back from the rock face, sounding bigger than they should. Popped the hood, propped it up. Steam hissed soft from the radiator cap, curling up lazy in the beam. I swept the light over everything, belts tight, hoses intact, no puddles underneath. Battery terminals clean, fuel filter clear. Tried the starter from under there. Click, nothing. Dead as a doornail. Cursed under my breath, wiped sweat off my forehead despite the chill settling in. No cell signal, of course, these hollows eat it like candy. GPS blinked, searching like it was mocking me. Closest help was miles back or ahead, and hiking in the dark wasn't an option with bears and who knows what else out there. Climbed back into the cab, locked the doors out of habit. I'd been trucking long enough to know better than to wander off. Sat back, tilted my hat over my eyes, figured I'd wait it out till dawn or till another rig passed. They come through every hour or so, even at night. But as the minutes dragged, the fog thickened, pressing against the windows like breath. I cracked one for air, listened. At first, nothing unusual, just the drip of condensation from leaves overhead, maybe a far-off owl. Then faint rustling. Like dry leaves shifting in a breeze that wasn't there. I straightened up, peered out. The beam from my flashlight cut through the glass, illuminating swirls of mist and the edge of the underbrush maybe 15 feet off the shoulder. Nothing moving. Told myself it was deer or possum, common enough. But it didn't stop. The rustling grew rhythmic, shuffle, pause, shuffle, like something circling slow, testing the ground. I rolled the window up tight, locked it again though it already was. Heart picked up a notch. Swept the light around, fog bounced it back, turning the world into a white wall. The sounds faded for a bit, then came back stronger, closer. Not random anymore. Deliberate. I tried the key again, twist, click, silence. Battery light flickered weak, but that couldn't be, it had been fine. The cab felt smaller suddenly, the air thicker. I thought about my old man who'd driven these same roads back in the 70s. He used to talk about mountain folk, people who'd gone off-grid, living rough in the hollows, watching the highways for easy pickings. Stranded trucks, he'd say, were like bait. I shook it off as old stories, but the rustling didn't care. An hour in, maybe two, time blurs when you're waiting, a branch snapped. Close. Real close, like right at the edge of the gravel. Sharp crack that echoed off the cliffs. I bolted upright, grabbed the mag light like a club. Shone it out the passenger side. Mist and shadows, but something shifted just beyond the beam, quick, low to the ground. Gone before I could focus. Heart thumping now, loud enough I could feel it in my throat. Tried the engine once more. Nothing. CB radio. I thumbed the mic, called out on channel 19. Break 19, anybody copy? Got a breakdown in the pass near Klingman's, need a hand. Static hissed back, empty. No chatter at all, which was odd. Even at night there's always somebody jawing. The footsteps started then. Not rustling anymore. Clear steps, slow, crunching gravel circling the rig counterclockwise. One pause, two pause. Like whoever it was, or whatever, was measuring the truck looking for weak spots. I leaned over, shone the light down. Nothing visible under the chassis. But the steps kept coming, now at the rear, thumping soft against the trailer. I imagined hands running along the logs, testing straps. Froze in my seat, breath shallow. Memories flooded and unbidden, stories from truck stops about feral types in these mountains, families gone wild after generations off the grid, silent watchers who only came out for the vulnerable. I'd laughed them off over coffee, but here alone they didn't seem funny. I killed the interior light, sat in the dark. The footsteps paused at the driver's door. Silence stretched, 5 minutes, 10. Then a soft scrape like nails on metal right at the handle. Not hard, not trying to force it. Just exploring. I gripped the flashlight tighter, debated swinging the door open and confronting whatever it was. But something held me back, that quiet dread you get in the woods when you know you're not the top of the chain. The scrape came again, higher, along the window glass. I didn't look. Just stared straight ahead at the fog-shrouded road, willing another set of headlights to appear. Hours dragged like that, sounds ebbing and flowing, never aggressive, always probing. Footsteps would circle, stop, start again from a different spot. Once I swear I heard breathing, ragged, close to the vent. I cracked the window an inch earlier, now I regretted it. Slammed it shut, but the sense lingered. My mind raced to explanations. Animals, wind, exhaustion, hallucinations. But the snaps and crunches were too human, too calculated. I thought about my wife back home, waiting for my call at the end of the run. Kids asleep. What if no one came? What if the battery died completely, leaving me in total black? Dawn finally started graying the east, slow as molasses. The fog lifted a touch, turning the world milky. The sounds had faded maybe half an hour before, last footsteps trailing off into the brush. I tried the key one more time, not expecting much. Twist, cough, rumble. Engine caught like it had never quit, gauges jumping normal. I sat stunned, then threw it into gear, eased out careful onto the pavement. Glanced in the mirrors as I pulled away, the shoulder looked undisturbed at first. But as the light strengthened, I saw them, prints in the soft mud around where the truck had sat. Bare feet. Not one set. Multiple. Overlapping, circling, too many for a single person or even two. Some small, some large, like a group had gathered silent in the night. I drove straight to the next diner, hands still shaking on the wheel. Ordered coffee black, sat staring out the window. An old local at the counter overheard me muttering to the waitress about the breakdown. He leaned over, voice low. That pass. Folks say there's watchers up there. Old families, gone back to the land after the wars or the floods. They don't take kindly to intruders, but they don't rush neither. Just wait for the dark to deepen, see if you'll panic. He chuckled dry, but his eyes weren't laughing. Lucky you started when you did. I nodded, paid, left without finishing the cup. Never broke down in that pass again, reroute if I have to, even if it adds hours. But the memory rides with me on every night haul. The rustling that turns to steps. The scrape at the door. The prints left behind, proof something was there, circling patient. I wonder sometimes if they were waiting for me to step out or if the watching was enough. If next time the engine quits, they might not wait till dawn. These mountains hold their secrets close. And on foggy nights, when the road twists empty and the engine hitches just a little, I feel them still, out there in the hollows, listening for the silence that means someone's stranded again. waiting for the dark to deepen, one slow step at a time. I was coming back empty from a drop in Gatlinburg, running the backside of the Smokies toward Cherokee on one of those narrow two lanes that hug the ridges like they're afraid to let go. It had rained hard earlier, the kind of sudden mountain downpour that leaves the asphalt black and slick, steam rising off it in thin ghosts under the headlights. The wipers had left long streaks on the windshield that never quite cleared, and the fog was already settling low in the hollows, turning every curve into a white wall until I was almost on top of it. I'd been driving these passes long enough to know the feel of them, the way the road drops away on your right, the way the trees lean in like they're listening, but that night the air felt heavier, thicker, like the mountains were pressing down. I was climbing a long grade just past Newfound Gap when it happened. The truck lurched once, hard, like someone had yanked the throttle back. Gauges dropped in a heartbeat, oil pressure, volts, everything flatlining. The engine quit cold, no sputter, no warning cough, just silence where the rumble should have been. Momentum carried me another 100 yards before I coasted to the shoulder, tires crunching gravel that sounded too loud in the sudden quiet. I set the flashers, killed the headlights to save battery, and sat there a minute letting my pulse slow. No cell bars. CB hissed static when I keyed the mic. Break 19, anybody southbound near Newfound? Rig down, need a pull. Nothing came back but the pop and crackle of dead air. I stepped down into the chill. The fog had thickened while I sat. It curled around my boots like smoke from a low fire. Hood up, flashlight in hand, I leaned over the engine bay. Battery terminals clean, cables tight. Fuel lines dry, no leaks. Plugs looked good. But when I tried the key again from the door, nothing. No click, no turnover, no nothing. Like the spark had been snuffed out clean. I cursed under my breath, slammed the hood and climbed back inside to wait. These roads see breakdowns all the time. Someone would come along eventually. I locked the doors out of habit, cracked the window an inch for air, and settled in to listen to the night. That's when the whispering started. At first I thought it was wind moving through the pines, or water dripping off the undercarriage onto hot metal. A low murmur, indistinct, rising and falling like conversation carried on a breeze. I leaned toward the open window, straining. The sound wasn't coming from outside exactly, it was underneath, muffled, vibrating up through the floorboards and the frame like it was talking through the vents. I killed the dome light, cupped my hands around my ears. Words began to separate from the hiss. Names. Not random. What? My first name, slow and careful, repeated like someone tasting it. Then others, names I didn't recognize but the tone was the same. Soft, urgent, almost pleading. My skin went cold all at once. I leaned out the window, flashlight beam sweeping under the chassis. Nothing but dripping rainwater pooling in the gravel, oil stains from years of trucks, the dark belly of the trailer. No one crouched there. No boots, no hands, no face staring back. Just empty space and the beam shaking in my grip. I pulled back inside, heart knocking against my ribs, and tried the CB again. Anybody copy? Got voices under my rig, need eyes on me. Static. Always static. The whispers didn't stop. They grew clearer, more insistent. Stay put, one voice said, low and calm, the way you talk to a child who's wandered too far. Just stay right there. Another layered in, overlapping, we're coming. Don't move. My name again, drawn out longer this time like a sigh. I locked the passenger door too, even though it was already locked, and slid lower in the seat until my head was below the window line. The voices kept on, patient, never rising to shouts, never frantic, just steady like they had all night. I don't know how long I sat like that. Hours maybe. The fog pressed against the glass, turning the world outside into milky nothing. Every so often I'd risk a glance at the mirrors, nothing moving, no lights, no shapes. But the whispers never let up. They shifted from directions to fragments of stories. Someone talking about a wreck years back, a rig gone over the edge in fog just like this, the driver waiting for help that never came. Names again, different ones now but always circling back to mine. You're almost there, one said. Just wait a little longer. I kept telling myself it was exhaustion, a trick of the mind after too many miles and too little sleep. Or maybe exhaust fumes leaking in somewhere, carbon monoxide making me hear things. But the voices felt too specific, too personal. They knew my name. They knew I was alone. They knew I was scared. Sometime before dawn the whispers began to fade, growing thinner, more distant, like a radio signal losing strength as you drive out of range. The sky grayed slowly through the fog. I waited another half hour after the voices stopped completely, then tried the key. The engine turned over on the first crank, smooth and strong, like nothing had ever been wrong. I let it idle a minute, listening hard. No murmurs, no names, just the familiar diesel rumble. I pulled back onto the highway slow, headlights cutting tunnels through the lifting mist, and didn't stop until I hit a proper truck stop in Cherokee with bright lights and people moving around. The mechanic who looked at it later that morning found the ignition wires clipped clean, 2 precise cuts right at the coil pack like someone had taken their time with side cutters. No frayed ends, no corrosion. Deliberate. He asked if I'd had trouble with anyone lately. I shook my head. He just grunted and said people get funny ideas out here sometimes. I ate breakfast at the diner across the lot, greasy eggs, black coffee, and listened while a couple of old-timers at the counter talked low about the mountains. How the hollows hold on to things, how folks who go missing don't always stay gone, how sometimes you hear them calling from places they shouldn't be. One of them glanced my way, eyes narrow. "You hear anything last night?" he asked. I told him no. He nodded slow like he didn't believe me and went back to his plate. I still carry bolt cutters in the toolbox now, wrapped in an old rag so they don't rattle. I check the wiring every time I stop for more than 10 minutes. I don't run those back roads after dark if I can help it. But some nights, when the fog rolls in thick and the CB stays quiet, I catch myself listening anyway, leaning toward the vents, breath held, waiting for the murmur to start again. It hasn't yet. But I know the mountains don't forget. They keep what they take, and sometimes they reach out to remind you you're not as alone as you think. The whispers ride with me now, faint echoes in the back of my mind on every long haul. Not loud. Not constant. Just there. Patient. Waiting for the next time the engine quits in the dark. Waiting for me to stop. Waiting for me to listen. The rain came down in sheets that night, the kind that turns the Smoky Mountains into something alive and angry. I was pushing hard toward Townsend, loaded light with produce crates from a late pickup in Cherokee, the wipers slapping frantic against the windshield but barely keeping up. Water sheeted off the hood, blurred the yellow lines into smears, and the road felt narrower with every mile, the trees crowding closer like they wanted in. I'd been on these passes too many years to count, but that stretch past Cades Cove always carried a weight. Hollows that swallowed sound, ridges that blocked cell towers and CB range alike. The fuel gauge had been flirting with empty for the last 20 miles. I kept telling myself the next pullout would have a station, but the storm had other ideas. It started with a cough. Not dramatic, just a hesitation in the engine's rhythm, then another, then the whole thing quit like someone flipped a switch. I coasted the rig into a wide gravel pullout I'd used before, one tucked against a steep embankment on the driver's side and dense laurel thicket on the passenger. Killed the lights to save battery, set the flashers blinking weak yellow through the downpour. Popped the hood anyway, though I knew it was pointless in that weather. Rain hammered my back as I leaned in, flashlight beam jittering across the fuel pump. Clogged filter, maybe, or water in the lines from a bad tank somewhere back. I wiped my face, cursing under my breath, and climbed back inside dripping. The cab smelled of wet denim and old coffee. I locked the doors out of habit, killed the wipers to conserve what little juice was left, and sat listening to the rain pound the roof like fists. No signal on the phone. CB hissed static when I keyed it up. Just me, the rig, and the storm. I told myself a tow would come eventually. Someone always passed these roads even at 3 in the morning, but the minutes stretched long, and the cold started seeping through the floorboards. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Not loud at first. Soft sloshes in the gravel, muffled by the rain, but unmistakable. Slow. One deliberate step after another, circling the trailer. I froze, breath caught halfway. Leaned toward the passenger window, tried to peer through the streaked glass. Nothing but black and silver water running in rivers down the pane. The steps kept going, around the front, past the driver's door, pausing there. A faint metallic click, like fingers brushing the handle, testing it gentle. The lock held. Another pause. Then the steps moved on, circling again. My pulse thumped loud in my ears. I reached under the seat for the knife I kept there, old folding blade, nothing fancy but heavy enough. Gripped it tight, thumb on the lock. The footsteps came back around, slower this time, and the rig rocked, just a little. Subtle shift, like weight leaning against the frame near the sleeper berth. Not enough to tip anything, just enough to make the suspension creak. Then stillness. Rain drumming steady. I waited, staring at the fogged windshield where shapes might have been forming if I looked too long. Minutes later the rocking came again, different side near the fuel tanks. Another soft push. Testing. Like someone feeling for weakness, seeing how much give there was before they tried harder. I whispered to myself to stay calm, that it was probably a drunk hiker, a lost hunter, somebody caught out in the storm same as me. But the footsteps didn't hurry. They didn't stumble. They circled patient, methodical, pausing at each door, each window, each vulnerable spot. Once they stopped right outside the driver's side, Close enough I could almost feel the heat of breath against the glass if there had been any. The handle rattled, once, twice, soft, exploratory. Lock. The pressure eased. I sat rigid, knife open in my lap, listening to the rain mask everything. The footsteps faded for a while, then returned. They didn't speak. No calls for help, no curses, no pleas. Just the slow circuit, the occasional rock of the cab, the patient wait. Hours bled together. My back ached from staying still. The battery light flickered low. I turned off the dome light to save it. Cold settled deeper. I thought about starting the engine anyway, risking the drain, but every time I reached for the key, the footsteps would pause like they knew. Dawn came slow, gray light bleeding through the trees. The rain eased to a steady drip. The footsteps stopped sometime before first light. I didn't hear them leave, just realized the silence had returned. I waited another half hour, listening hard, then turned the key. The engine caught reluctant, sputtered, then smoothed out like nothing had happened. The fuel pump purred steady again. I eased the rig back onto the highway, tires chewing wet gravel, and didn't look in the mirrors until the pullout was out of sight. At the first proper station in Townsend I pulled in under bright lights, killed the engine and climbed down shaking. Walked around the rig slow. Mud everywhere, thick, churned from the rain. Tire tracks from my own wheels, sure. But around the doors, the fuel tanks, the sleeper steps, boot prints. Deep, fresh, overlapping in places. Different sizes. One set large, heavy tread. Another smaller, narrower like a woman's or a kid's. They circled the truck the same way the steps had. Paused at the handles. One print pressed flat against the driver's door, like someone had leaned their full weight there. The attendant, an older man with a face like worn leather, came out wiping his hands on a rag. Saw me staring at the mud. Asked if I was all right. I told him the truck died in the storm, someone walking around outside all night. He looked at the prints, then at me, expression flat. Rain brings 'em out, he said quiet. Folks who don't like being seen in daylight. Drifters maybe. Or worse. They wait for the stalled ones. Test the doors. See if anyone's dumb enough to open up. He didn't offer more. Just shrugged, went back inside. I fueled up, paid cash and drove on. Cleaned the mud off as best I could at the next stop, but some of it stayed. Smears on the paint, faint outlines of palms on the glass that wouldn't quite wipe away. I carry extra cans now. Spare pump filter. Jumper cables. A bigger knife. I check the fuel twice before every run through those passes. But storms still come. Rain still hammers the roof like it wants in. And on nights when the wipers struggle and the road disappears into gray, I catch myself listening harder than I should. Waiting for the first soft slosh in the gravel. For the slow circle to begin again. I don't know who they were. Don't know if they wanted the truck, the load, or just to know someone was alone and listening. All I know is they were patient. They waited through the worst of it. And when the light came, they left their marks behind, quiet proof that the night hadn't been empty. Sometimes, when the rain starts again and I'm climbing those same passes, I feel the cab shift, just a little, like weight settling against the frame. Not enough to be sure. Just enough to remember. I keep driving. But I never open the door first. I'd been running the same route through the Smokies for close to a decade. Roanoke down to Knoxville, back up empty most times, the kind of loop that wears grooves into your mind as much as into the tires. That night in late November the temperature had dropped fast after sunset, the kind of cold that makes metal brittle and breath hang like smoke. I was climbing the long grade toward Raven Fork, loaded light with produce crates, when the dash lit up sudden and angry. Alternator warning, voltage dropping like a stone. No cough from the engine, no shudder, just the gauges bleeding out and the headlights dimming to a weak yellow before everything went black. The rig coasted silent for a few hundred feet, momentum carrying me around the hairpin where the guardrail was crumpled from some wreck years back. I eased onto the narrow shoulder, set the flashers even though the battery was already dying, and killed what was left of the ignition. The quiet hit hard. No wind, no distant semis, just the slow tick of cooling metal and the faint hoot of an owl somewhere far down the ridge. I grabbed my mag light from under the seat, stepped down, boots crunching on loose gravel that slid toward the drop-off. Hood up, beams sweeping the engine bay. The serpentine belt was gone, snapped clean, ends frayed like they'd been worried apart by teeth instead of normal wear. I ran my fingers along the pulleys, no scorch marks, no oil spray, just that unnatural fray. I didn't carry a spare belt that size. No one does for a quick roadside fix out here. Signal on the phone was 0 bars, CB hissing empty static. I was alone on a stretch of road most folks avoided after dark. I climbed back into the cab to wait, doors locked, windows cracked just enough to hear if anything moved. The cold seeped in fast. I wrapped my jacket tighter, tried to breathe slow. That's when the first light appeared. Down the slope, maybe 100 yards below the road, a faint glow flickered between the pines, pale, bluish, the color of moonlight filtered through fog. Not a flashlight beam cutting sharp. This was softer, rounder, like someone carrying a lantern that didn't flicker with flame. I leaned toward the passenger window, squinting. Another appeared beside it, then a third, weaving slow through the underbrush. They moved in loose formation, bobbing slightly as though held at waist height, but there was no sound, no crunch of leaves, no snap of twigs, no murmur of voices. Just silent drift, circling wider, then tightening like searchers sweeping a grid. My pulse climbed. I told myself hikers, lost campers, maybe kids messing around with glow sticks. But the way they moved was too deliberate, too synchronized. No stumbling, no pauses to check footing on the steep terrain. They kept climbing, slow and steady, angling toward the shoulder where my rig sat dark and dead. I killed the interior light, pulled the curtain across the sleeper berth and crouched low, watching through a slit in the fabric. They reached the road edge. The orbs hovered just beyond the guardrail, 3 of them now, maybe 4, steady, unblinking, casting weak pools of light across the asphalt. Shadows stretched long and wrong from the tires and undercarriage, bending at angles that didn't match the source. One orb drifted closer to the driver's side, hovering near the front wheel, the glow seeping under the fender like it was inspecting the axle. No heat, no flicker, just that cold, patient light probing. I could feel it, somehow, like eyes resting on the metal, on the cab, on me inside. I stayed perfectly still. Breath shallow, barely moving my chest. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The orbs circled the truck once, twice, never touching, never rising higher than head height. They paused at the rear doors, then drifted to the passenger side, lingering there as though listening. No footsteps accompanied them. No rustle of clothing. Just the soft, persistent hum of my own blood in my ears and the occasional distant owl call that suddenly sounded too human. I kept waiting for them to leave. They didn't. They simply held position, patient as stone, the glow steady enough to read by if I dared open a book. I thought about starting the truck anyway, maybe enough juice left in the battery to crank it once, but the starter would whine and die and the noise might draw them closer. I thought about stepping out, yelling, shining my own light back at them. But the memory of that frayed belt stopped me cold. Something had been here before me, something with patience and teeth. The sky began to pale sometime around 5. Gray light filtered through the trees, thinning the dark. The orbs dimmed gradually as though reluctant, then winked out one by one like dying coals. No retreat down the slope, no sudden flight, just gone, leaving the shoulder empty except for my rig and the mist curling off the ridge. I waited another half hour before I moved. Climbed down stiff, legs numb and checked the ground. No footprints in the soft dirt beyond the guardrail. No broken branches. Nothing to prove anything had been there except the memory burned into my skull. I hiked uphill half a mile to where the signal sometimes flickered back, called for a tow. The driver who came was a local guy, quiet, didn't ask many questions. He looked at the belt, whistled low. "Looks chewed," he said, "like a coon or something got in there, but, hell, that's clean work." He replaced it with a spare from his truck, got me running and followed me down to the shop in Cherokee. The mechanic there, a gray-haired man who'd worked these mountains 40 years, studied the old belt under bright shop lights. "Teeth marks," he muttered, "but not animal. Too even. Too deliberate." He didn't elaborate. Just shook his head and charged me for the tow. Rangers I talked to later mentioned the lights. Not officially, never on record. Just quiet stories passed over coffee at the station. Orbs in the gaps, showing up when someone's stranded, circling slow, waiting. Drawn to the vulnerable, they said. To the ones who can't leave. Most folks who see them make it out. Most. I still drive the Smokies. Routes don't change themselves and the bills keep coming. But I carry extra belts now, a good jump pack, and I don't trust the quiet anymore. On clear nights when the moon is low and the ridges turn black, I keep the CB low but on, just in case. And when the engine runs smooth and the road stays empty, I still glance down the slope sometimes, half expecting to see them again. Faint glows weaving through the pines, patient, silent, circling wider each time. They never rushed me that night. Never tried the doors. Never spoke. They just waited. Like they knew sooner or later the dark would bring me back. And maybe next time I won't make it to morning light. I keep driving anyway. Because stopping feels worse. I was hauling a full load of lumber out of Bryson City, headed north over Newfound Gap toward Gatlinburg. It was early December, one of those nights when the temperature drops fast once the sun leaves the ridges, and the Smokies turned from postcard pretty to something colder, older. The truck was a '98 Freightliner, reliable enough but tired, and the load was heavy, green pine stacked high, shifting just enough on the climbs to make me keep one eye on the mirrors. I'd been running these passes for years, knew every curve, every pull-off, every spot where the guardrails ended too soon and the drop went straight into black nothing. The climb started steady out of Cherokee, engine laboring but holding. I kept the heater on low, windows cracked an inch because the cab always smelled faintly of old coffee and wet boots after a long run. Around 3,000 feet the temperature gauge crept up slow, then jumped. Steam began curling out from under the hood like smoke from a dying fire. I cursed under my breath, eased off the throttle, but the needle kept climbing. By the time I hit the last big switchback before the gap, the radiator had given up. A loud pop, white cloud exploding across the windshield, engine seizing with that sick grinding sound metal makes when it's too hot and too dry. I coasted the last quarter mile, nursing the rig onto the overlook lot at the top of Newfound Gap. The place was empty. No cars, no RVs, no late-night tourists taking pictures of the lights far below. Just the wide paved semicircle, the low stone wall, and the mountains falling away on both sides into deep, moonless dark. The sign said elevation 5,046 feet. Wind moved through the pines with a low, steady hiss. I set the brakes, killed the engine and sat there a minute letting my pulse settle. Steam still rose in lazy coils from the hood. Outside temperature read 28 on the dash. Felt colder. I popped the hood, grabbed the flashlight from under the seat. Coolant had sprayed everywhere, puddles on the asphalt, hissing as they hit the cold ground. The hoses looked intact, but the radiator cap was loose, probably never tightened right after the last flush. I let it sit, knowing better than to touch anything hot. Walked back to the cab, climbed in, locked the doors out of habit. Sat with the dome light on low, breathing slow, watching my breath fog the windshield in small clouds. The heater was dead with the engine off. I pulled my coat tighter, zipped it to the chin. That's when the cold changed. It didn't creep in gradual like mountain cold usually does. It arrived sudden and deep, like someone had opened a freezer door right behind me. My breath thickened, visible even in the dim cab light. The windows began to frost, not from the inside like they should have, but from the outside, ice crystals blooming fast across the glass in patterns that looked almost deliberate. I leaned forward, wiped a circle clear with my sleeve. Nothing but black ridges and the faint glow of distant valley lights miles below. I wiped again. The frost kept coming back thicker. Then I felt it. A draft, soft, steady right at the back of my neck. Warm at first, almost like someone breathing close enough for me to feel the heat of their mouth. Then it cooled, turned cold, turned icy. Exhaled slow against my skin. I froze. Didn't turn right away. Just sat there, every muscle locked, listening. The cab was silent except for the wind outside and the faint ticking of the cooling engine. No footsteps on the pavement. No rustle of clothes. Nothing. I turned my head slow. Empty. The sleeper berth curtain was drawn half open like always, but nothing moved behind it. No shape in the shadows. I reached back, swept my hand through the space, cold air, nothing else. Turned front again. The windows were fully fogged now, opaque white except for the small clear patches where I'd wiped. I exhaled hard, watched my breath plume. Then another breath appeared beside it, smaller, shallower, not quite matching mine. It drifted across the glass slow, like someone standing just outside the driver's door, leaning in. I held my breath. The other breathing continued. Shallow, ragged at the edges, the way someone breathes when they're cold and tired and trying not to make noise. It didn't stop when I did. It kept going, steady, close enough I could almost feel the rhythm against my ear. I pressed my back against the seat, eyes wide, staring at the fogged windshield. Another breath bloomed, lower this time, near the bottom of the glass like whoever it was had shifted, crouched maybe. The sound came clearer now, not just air moving but a faint wet rasp at the end of each exhale, like lungs that hadn't been used right in a long time. I fumbled for the key, hands numb. Engine turned over once, twice, caught weak, sputtered, died. Tried again. Nothing. Battery light flickered. I slammed my palm on the wheel, breath coming fast now, fogging everything. The other breathing matched it for a second, quick, panicked, then slowed again, deliberate, patient. I locked eyes on the rearview mirror. Nothing in the back. Nothing in the side mirrors but dark pavement and the stone wall. But the breathing stayed. Right there. Inside the cab somehow, or pressed so close to the glass it felt the same. Minutes dragged. Maybe 10. Maybe 20. I sat rigid, listening to it sink and unsink with my own. When I held my breath again, it kept going alone, soft, persistent, like it didn't need me to keep the rhythm. I whispered something, don't remember what, maybe, who's there, maybe just a curse. No answer. Just the breathing, steady as a metronome. Eventually the first gray edge of dawn showed over the eastern ridge. The frost on the windows began to thin, melting in slow rivulets. The cold in the cab eased, not sudden but gradual, like a door closing somewhere far off. The breathing faded last, grew shallower, farther, until it was gone. I sat there another half hour waiting for full light, afraid to move too soon. When the sun finally cleared the peaks, I tried the key again. Engine caught rough but held. I let it idle, heater blasting, watching the steam rise off the hood as the metal warmed. I limped the rig down the other side into Gatlinburg, found a mechanic who owed me a favor from years back. He pressure tested the system, found no obvious leak. Said the cap must have worked itself loose, coolant boiled off slow. Nothing else wrong. I asked if he'd ever heard stories about the gap, cold spots, breathing sounds. He gave me a long look, shrugged. Folks talk. Hikers mostly. Say sometimes you feel someone walking right behind you on the trails, but when you turn, nothing. Or hear breathing in the fog when you're alone. Old-timers call it the lost ones, people who froze up here over the years still trying to get warm. He handed me my keys. I don't stop here after dark anymore. I thanked him, paid cash, drove on. I still cross Newfound Gap when the route demands it. Still haul loads over those ridges in winter. But I don't pull off at the overlook anymore. I keep the cab warmer than I need to, heater on high even when I'm sweating. I keep the windows cracked just enough for fresh air but not enough for drafts. And when the temperature drops fast and my breath starts to show, I talk to myself, quiet, steady, just to fill the silence. Just to make sure the only breathing I hear is mine. Some nights, though, when the road is empty and the wind moves cold through the pass, I catch myself holding my breath anyway. Listening. Waiting to see if something answers. It never does. But I keep listening. Because once it did. And part of me still wonders if it's waiting for the next time the radiator blows, the next time I'm forced to stop high up where the air is thin and the dark is deep. Waiting to lean in again, close enough to share its cold. Waiting to breathe with me until morning comes. Or until it doesn't. It was one of those late spring runs through the Smokies where the air still carries winter's edge, sharp and clean, but the days stretch long enough to make you think summer's close. I'd picked up a load of lumber in Cherokee, headed north toward Pigeon Forge, the kind of haul that pays decent if you don't dawdle. The truck was an older Freightliner, reliable mostly, but the tires were due, recaps on the drives, fresh steers up front. I checked them at the yard before leaving, kicked the sidewalls, watched the pressure gauges settle. Everything looked good. The road out of the valley climbs steady, then drops into these narrow hollows where the pavement narrows and the trees crowd in like they're guarding secrets. By dusk the light was bleeding out fast, turning the ridges purple and black. I kept the CB low, just enough static to feel connected to the world. Around 9:30 the steering started pulling hard left. Not violent, just insistent, the way it does when a tire's losing air quick. I eased off the gas, felt the rig settle uneven on the left rear. Pressure light came on a second later, then the low tire buzzer. No shoulder worth a damn in that stretch, just rock wall on the driver's side, guardrail and drop on the right. I nursed it another half mile until a small roadside clearing opened up, one of those pullouts they cut for emergency stops or scenic views nobody stops at after dark. Gravel lot, maybe 30 feet wide, ringed by dense laurel and pine. I angled the trailer in, set the brakes, killed the engine. The quiet rushed in, immediate and thick. No traffic, no wind, just the faint ticking of metal cooling and my own breathing. I stepped down slow, boots crunching gravel that sounded too loud. Grabbed the flashlight and the toolkit from behind the seat. The left rear dual was flat as a pancake, sidewall bulging, rim sitting low. I cursed under my breath. Must have picked up a nail or a piece of rebar back in town. No big deal, I told myself. I'd changed worse and worse places. Set the flashlight on the ground to angle up under the fender, dragged the spare out from the rack underneath. It was heavy, awkward in the dim. Jacked the axle up, careful, blocks under the frame for safety. Air hissed out when I cracked the valve stem, more than it should have. I knelt, shone the light close. The stem was sliced clean through, not cut by road debris. Deliberate. A knife or razor, thin and precise. My stomach tightened. Sabotage doesn't happen often, but when it does out here, it's usually locals messing with out-of-state plates or kids bored on back roads. Still, the timing felt wrong, too quiet, too isolated. I shook it off, focused on the job. Loosened the lugs with the breaker bar, muscles burning from the leverage. The flashlight beam wavered as I worked, throwing long shadows across the gravel. My own shadow stretched huge behind me, distorted by the angle of the light. I noticed it first when I shifted to pull the wheel off. The shadow didn't match perfectly. When I leaned forward to pry the tire free, my shadow leaned too, but a fraction slower, like it was deciding whether to follow. I froze mid-motion, wrench still in hand. Blinked hard. Fatigue, I thought. Long day, bad light. But when I straightened up, the shadow stayed crouched a beat longer than it should have. Then it split. Not like a trick of light or double image. Clean division. One shadow remained where mine was, kneeling, arms extended toward the wheel. The other peeled away, taller, thinner, moving independent across the gravel. Silent. No sound of footsteps, no rustle. Just gliding, deliberate, circling to the right of the truck like it was inspecting the rig from a distance. I felt the hair rise on my arms, slow and prickling. Told myself it was the headlight spill bouncing off the chrome, or fog starting to drift in from the hollow below. But the second shadow kept moving, stopped near the front tire, bent at the waist as if listening to the air pressure, then continued around the cab. I stayed low, pretending to work, eyes locked on the ground. The flashlight beam trembled in my grip. When I risked a glance up, the extra shadow had knelt beside the spare I just rolled out. Its hand, long fingers stretched by the distortion, reached toward the sidewall, probing like it was feeling for weak spots, testing the rubber the way a person might press a thumb into fruit to check ripeness. No contact I could see, but the motion was so precise, so careful. My real hand tightened on the wrench until the knuckles ached white. I stepped back one pace slow. The shadow followed, rose smooth, matched my retreat without hesitation. Gravel didn't crunch under it, nothing moved except the shape on the ground. I took another step toward the cab door. It glided after me, silent, keeping the same distance. Heart slamming now, breath shallow. I bolted the last lug on the spare half tight, didn't care about torque specs. Dropped the jack fast, wheels hitting pavement with a thud. Climbed into the cab, slammed the door, locked it. Key in, engine caught rough but held. Threw it into gear, eased forward, gravel spitting under the tires. In the side mirrors I watched the clearing recede. The extra shadow didn't follow the truck. It stayed exactly where I'd left it, standing upright beside the old flat tire, arms at its sides, head tilted slightly as if watching me go. As the headlights swept away, it straightened slow, almost leisurely, like someone finishing a thought. Then the mirrors showed only empty road and dark trees. I drove the rest of the way on the spare, pushing speed where I could, eyes flicking to every mirror. No pursuit. No lights behind. Just the hum of the engine and the low whine of the underinflated tire. Reached a big truck stop outside Sevierville around 1 a.m., parked under the brightest floods I could find. Sat there breathing hard for 10 minutes before I climbed down to inspect. The valve stems on the other duals were fine, untouched. Only the one that failed had been cut. Mechanic on duty the next morning confirmed it when I showed him. Clean slice, razor or box cutter, no accident. He asked if I'd pissed anybody off lately. I shook my head. He shrugged, said people do strange things in these mountains. Bored kids, drifters, old grudges. Truckers at the counter had their own stories. Shadows in the passes that move wrong, remnants of folks who never quite left the hollows, testing the weary, seeing who might stop long enough to join them. I checked my tires twice now. Every stop, every fuel island, flashlight in hand, looking not just for wear but for cuts, for tampering. I avoid pulling over in those narrow hollows after dark if I can help it. But sometimes, when the light hits the pavement just right and my shadow stretches long across the gravel, I catch myself watching it close, waiting for the moment it decides to split again, to move on its own, to reach towards something I'm not ready to see. I still drive those roads. Have to. The mountains don't care about fear or fatigue, they just wait. And on quiet nights, when the rig is rolling steady and the CB is silent, I sometimes feel it, that extra weight in the mirrors, patient, circling slow, testing for weakness the way it tested the tire. Waiting to see if I'll stop again. Waiting to see if this time I'll kneel long enough for it to reach me.